Hey guys, this is Anthony here. Today I'll be talking about the art of catching and cooking catfish. I'll be going over different equipment you would use, different hooks, bait, different ways you can actually catch catfish, and some of the locations that you can catch them. More so for the northern part of the country. But before that, know your possession limit and your bag limit for your catfish. Up here in North Dakota is 5 catfish. You're allowed one over 24 inches, and then make sure you have your state fishing license. I can't stress that enough. That can be a huge fine depending on where you are. But you also need to know what you are catching, because the four big ones in America are the blue catfish, the channel catfish, which is typically what I catch, and then the flathead catfish, which you can catch up here, and then the one that's not shown is a stone catfish. It's about 6 inches long. The different types of bait you can use. Commonly, what I use is goldeye, just because it's readily available and you can catch it pretty easily with worms, with a spinner or bobber fishing. Other parts of the country, you can use shads, just because they're not readily available up here like the goldeye are. Some of the other ones I've used cut up suckerfish or smaller sucker minnows. Those right now are a little harder to get just because we had a bad breeding winter for them. And then you can also use earthworms. You don't have to buy them. Just water your lawn one night really heavily and they'll be there the next morning. Locations to catch catfish, they're typically in muddy lakes or rivers, or they're in constant moving water. Up here in North Dakota, we have the Red River. That's where I typically catch them. And the Red River is a very muddy, clayey river. The best times to catch catfish is typically at sunrise, maybe an hour before, and sunset. Typically an hour before sunset. Throughout the night is really good to catch them. Early spring is very good, right before they spawn, and then late fall is really good as well. The types of nets. You have rubber nets and you have rope nets. Some of the advantages of rubber nets is they're typically sturdier than the rope nets, just depending on what brand. But the disadvantage to rubber nets is once they're broken, they're not all that good. I use a rope net, typically. The types of fishing rods, you have long ones, short ones, thick ones, thinner ones. I typically use a longer catfish rod just so I can get the leverage. I have a short one that's okay, but I don't really like it just because I don't have much leverage with it. The types of fishing reels, you have your bait caster, which is what I typically use. That's the bottom reel. The one in the middle is a push button reel. That one's okay. And then the top right one, which is what's commonly used, is the open face catfish, or that's the king cat fishing reel. Types of fishing line, you have your monofilament and you have braid or spider wire, whatever you want to call it. Each one has its advantages. Braid is typically stronger, has a higher tensile strength than mono, but mono stretches a little better. It all depends on how you fish. I like to horse mine in. Then you have the types of fishing tackle. You have your fishing weights. Type of weights, you typically have like teardrops, fishing hooks. You can see a circle hook, and then in the bottom left you see a J hook, a couple different rigs for it. Some of the do's and don'ts. You don't have to use super heavy equipment when it comes to catfishing. And then, because I typically use about 30-pound, don't waste fish. Make sure you're using the correct bait, follow your regulations, and enjoy the catfishing fight because it is phenomenal. I love it. Some of the myths, you don't have to use stinky bait. Actually, some of the best bait to use is your fresh or natural bait. Like I mentioned before, goldeye is really good to use up here. They're not always bottom feeders. You can catch them everywhere. Big catfish taste just as good. And it's kind of back and forth. Noodling is legal in 16 states. We're up from 4 in 2001. It can be fun, but it is dangerous. The part about noodling, which is kind of confusing, it's a very controversial topic. and it has been around for hundreds of years. The dangers of noodling, like I said, it was drowning. Drowning is a huge, huge danger of noodling. That's why most people, when they do noodle, they only do it in groups. It's destructive to future generations because it'll break it, and then from the bites, you risk infections. Now, how to kind of prepare them, you have your butterfly filleting, which you see in the top. That's typically just cutting around the ribs. Um, and then when you fold the fillets down, it kind of looks like a butterfly. And then you have straight filleting where you cut through the ribs down to the tail, as you kind of shows in the other picture. For catfish recipes, you have shore lunch. You have, which typically is when you fry them. You have grilling, and then which you see in the bottom left, and then you have smoking, which you see in the bottom middle. So this is probably the freshest catfish you'll see probably recently. This one I just pulled up yesterday on Saturday. This one weighed about 17 to 20 pounds. It's 33.5 inches long. It was a big fight. And as far as like my final remarks for catfishing, if you ever get the chance to go catfishing, whether it's for channel cats, flathead cats, blue cats, do it. It is something that you will never regret in your life. It is an awesome, awesome experience. So, and that's the end of it. Thank you for your time, and have a good night.